Hey, this is part 2 of a video series where I look over The Evil Within. I looked over the first game in the previous video as well as the head director Shinji Mikami's history with horror gaming. If you haven't watched that video yet, I suggest you go back and do so, as I'll be referring to what I previously discussed throughout this one. If you already have, then let's get right to it. The Evil Within 2 hit the world at lightning pace, seeing as how the game wasn't even announced until it was just a few months away from launching. Compare that to the year and a half between the first game's announcement and launch. Also, I didn't feel like I was getting bombarded by its marketing at all. Just a trailer in E3, oh, and some bright ads in Tokyo. Even so, I was pretty excited to get my hands on the game. I didn't play it immediately as I was actually out of the country during its launch, but I learned that it received booming review scores all around, so I was stoked. I thought, holy hell, they must have refined the game perfectly, or maybe the story is a lot more fleshed out and told clearly from the get-go. This is gonna be awesome! That wasn't good. This was my initial reaction back in 2017 anyway. I was extremely disappointed in this game when I first played through it, and completely baffled by the reception from both critics and players. What is everyone seeing that I'm not? I did a little bit of research and a lot more of introspection, but I'll get into that entire matter later. The point is, I downright despised this game when it was new, and really didn't expect to. I have video evidence that I wanted to love it. We finally get a glimpse of The Evil Within 2. I'm glad that they continue to support Tango for this new adventure. From the bits of gameplay we've seen in the trailer, it looks like a heavy improvement in its mechanics, and the enemy design is looking exquisite. Sadly, that initial trailer was pretty much the most interesting imagery to come out of the entire project, but shortly after the release, I just dropped it and moved on. It sort of came and went anyway. While reviews in general were full of praise, the game sold pitifully during the holiday season, shelving the series away after a few updates. No real DLC to speak of this time around, besides a terribly wonky first-person mode that I won't really tear on. It was just part of a free surprise update. I played through the entire game again, twice, and have a lot more to say about the experience. Nearly 3 years detached from The Evil Within 2, and I'll at least say I don't really hate it anymore, but it still isn't that enjoyable for me. The plot opens up pieces of Sebastian's memos from the first game, which is an interesting choice. The conspiracy behind his daughter's death, which was barely touched upon in 1, is now brought to light, alive and imprisoned as the core inside this new STEM program's world called Union.
This machine, this miracle, will allow our species to achieve greatness. We needed to start with a mind that was pure and clean enough to support thousands of personalities. The mind of an innocent child.
You connected Lily to that machine?
Your daughter is quite special. The most stable core candidate we've ever tested. The new STEM has been a smashing success. Until recently.
A little over a week ago, Lily vanished. Just stopped sending signals. Then the STEM environment began to collapse. We thought it was just a technical glitch. An easy fix, so we sent a team of Mobius agents inside. But then we lost contact with them, and STEM went dark.
Think about this, Mr. Castellanos. I am providing you an opportunity. Not only to see your daughter again, but to save her life. Something you thought you failed to do before. You can save her, or let her die. It's your choice.
It's up to dedicated Father Sebastian to get out of his mentally bound cycle to rescue her, all while some douchebags are harassing him once he enters Union. The game itself also follows up points of the Kidman DLC chapters, which makes sense considering that the DLC story and this sequel shared the same director, John Johannes. I was a tad miffed over Mikami not directing the game this time around, but it's not like that decision can't lead to greatness. Him appointing Hideki Kamiya, an up-and-coming game designer back in 1998, to direct Resident Evil 2 got us one of the best goddamn survival horror games ever. I've seen claims that Shinji Mikami stated Evil Within 1 will be the very last game he'll ever direct, but all said claims I've seen are completely citationless. I'm not saying that statement doesn't exist, Just worth pointing out how tough it's been for me to find that evidence.
I want Tango Gameworks to be a studio where young and talented creators are given a chance to succeed. John Johannes has a lot of talent. An opportunity like this would have come his way, sooner or later.
Back to The Evil Within 2, the story and narrative aren't the only things that got a complete makeover. The gameplay is different as well. Obviously, it still bears the basic mechanics for a third-person action horror with stealth elements, but no longer is this a linear adventure with a relentless pace, no longer is it throwing its oppressive atmosphere at you without stop. Now it's an open venue where you go from point A to point B with random side missions popping up, and there are instances where you run into them on your own without warning. Stretches of the campaign are also completely linear for at least more than a few minutes. Honestly, this structure was a really big turnoff for me. Having a more open environment is fine if it's done right or at least has some kind of charm to it, but it's just really boring for this game. I can see they tried to give it a similar vibe that Silent Hill 1 and 2 had with its town, but I'll talk more about that later. For now, I'll just say they designed Exploring Union to be something closer to search action a la classic survival horror. But romping around this town is about as interesting as picking through a trash can. Not only do I find most of the memos and lore uninteresting, practically half of them being radio feed of soldiers dying.
I've been looking for you all over the place. Shit, John. What are you doing down here? You weren't supposed to see this. I don't understand. Whoa, don't point that thing at me. We're best friends, man. Come on. I know. And that makes what I have to do even harder. Stop joking around, man. Sorry, John. But I have to do this. Mobius doesn't allow for mistakes. Mobius? What on earth is Mobius?
But a lot of the town is broken into 3 completely different sections, making traveling and exploring really annoying when you want to 100% it. The other 2 districts are bridged with these computers, which I mistakenly thought was a fast travel mechanic at first. I don't understand why something couldn't be done to interconnect these areas more fluidly, at least closer to the end of the game. What was stopping them from making a single large venue? I doubt it's loading screens, and I understand the idea of making the later areas unreachable, but just put up some gates. Dead Rising did that. Personally speaking, I think a better idea would have been to expand the venues of the original STEM world from the first game with similar mechanics, building upon the lore and story of those areas instead. Perhaps in a sense that makes it more closely related to Mobius, who clearly had their hands in Beacon's business, as well as the church with its own connections. Not only because it would have been a stronger connection to the original game, but also because melding those different venues into one big world would have probably been more interesting than Union, which has little to no personality as it is. Regarding gameplay, Sebastian feels a lot stiffer to control, and the stealth mechanics are completely broken. Magnetizing to corners got annoying, and hitting the key to get away from them always felt inconsistent. The stealth attacks also completely diminished the challenge, even on the harder difficulty. It's bad enough that the enemy AI are completely brain dead. Having so much put against them not only alleviates the challenge, but also any hopes of them actually being threatening. They also removed a lot of mechanics from the original game, such as matches and common traps. Environmental obstacles are barely even in the game at all, just a couple puddles I don't think I really bothered utilizing, and wired witch time traps that are not only super easy to use, but just a crutch, since they aren't that hard to use or lure enemies into. And apparently there's even a wire trap that just wants to screw you over for no reason. I didn't even mention that the overabundance of items and supplies scattered around alleviate the challenge even more. However, I do like that particular upgrades are now gained through different methods, like finding ammo capacity upgrades on a fallen soldier's person. Makes more sense in context, so I give that props. Another positive note, the initial introduction for the game's world was pretty damn sharp. I love the visuals on display and the surreal feel of it. You know, until that big stupid thing decided to break in and ruin the mood. Still, I'll admit it did more for me than the first game's introduction. Both designed to teach you the basic tools for the game's stealth action. While I like the sadistic nature of the slaughterhouse and the sadist, walking with a limp was just annoying and it all felt a bit too obnoxious. Never mind the hiding mechanic that you'll never ever use after the first scenario because that shit is just not helpful. In fact, The Evil Within 2's introduction is so damn good that it made me even sadder that the rest of the game ends up being a boring heap that barely reaches as interesting of an atmosphere. I almost wish the entire game took place in this assortment of buildings full of claustrophobic scenarios. Kinda like if Let It Die was a horror game. Of course, they went with a completely opposite design philosophy. Even so, I will concur that the game does bear design choices I think are cool and can lead to fun situations. Unscheduled encounters, boss-like enemies becoming roaming threats later on, things like that. I just wish these kinds of elements were in something I can actually enjoy. And oh man, the Rogue Gallery. Oof, this was probably the worst thing about this game. I've already said how much I adore Nakamura's art and her concepts for the first title, something a lot of people disparaged. The most typical criticism being the porcelain masked enemies, which, sure, I get it, looks kinda like those folks from The Purge or The Strangers, sure. People didn't seem to like the sadists either. Like, damn, I know a big dude with a chainsaw isn't the most original thing ever, but Dr. Salvador's been doing the same thing for years and no one gave him shit for it. You ever try to get to know him? To appreciate him? I bet you didn't even know he was a doctor. The creatures in the first game had this beautifully horrific nature to them, common enemies having all kinds of objects lodged into their bodies, amalgamations of beings, animal or man, formed into these hulking terrors, a hairy shark thing. The first game's Rogue Gallery wasn't just a bunch of dudes covered in barbed wire, like some critics led people to believe. The creature designs in 2, on the other hand, are really underwhelming. The common enemies look, sound, and move like the typical modern zombies. I'm so tired of seeing them sport sprouted mouths and tattered clothes. The first game's zombies move slowly, but even a small number of them can overtake you easily if you weren't prepared. They didn't need to be quick to be threatening. And all those hisses and wheezes like they're struggling to even continue living while dead set on killing you. And their near breathless death cries. It was all so creepy. Now they feel ripped right out of The Walking Dead and are much more annoying to aim at thanks to their frantic movement. Thankfully, they're stupid as hell, so taking down even a bunch of them is super easy. The voice work is laughable too. They sound like they're trying to imitate Mike Patton's talent in Left 4 Dead. Since there isn't 1,000 of them coming after you like in said game, the voice bites sound really isolated and dumb. There's the big stupid thing, as we addressed before. It's big and it's stupid. The hysteric, which is just the witch, combined with, I don't know, May Canker. The lament, which I initially learned the name of because I literally googled Evil Within 2 farting creature and this page was the first result. It stands out as the most repugnant design to me since they just look like something out of Silent Hill Homecoming. The ghost is okay, a little derivative, but it set the mood alright for my favorite scenarios. And last, but certainly not best, almost certainly worst, here's my absolute favorite, the Watcher. This big, goopy creature covered in dripping white liquid all over. It's,
Comes with a little tub of jizzy hot syrup. It's hot cum. There's no way that's not hot cum.
This was the point I initially gave up on the game being scary in the slightest. The enemy designs got stupider as the game progressed until, whoa, that guy looks cool. I like how the entire face is being funneled into the tubed mask. Hey, maybe not all is lost with these new guys. But wait, I feel like I recognize him. Oh, now this is funny. This design was taken straight out of Nakamura's concept work. It's worth noting she was not involved in this project as she was temporarily absent to work with Capcom for a couple years, so they didn't even come up with a design. They just took an old one she scrapped. Hilarious. Anything specific I didn't mention, you can go ahead with the presumption that they suck too. Many people said The Evil Within 2 was a lot scarier than 1, but I don't really know why. The majority of the game was really predictable, and it doesn't really try to go for any subtle vibes that want to creep you out. Maybe it was trying, like with this scenario. Some folks said this encounter with the camera lady was scary, but I don't know, I just found it really funny how easily you can juke her and leave the scene before it feels like it even started. Oh, but I hear you shout, Genry, the story in The Evil Within 2 is so much better. You have to agree with that, right? The first game's story was non-existent and aimless. Don't you concur that The Evil Within 2's straightforward story was a big improvement? Ugh, I have to be honest, I think both games have major problems with their narrative, but the issues I have with 2's storyline are much more irritating. I will admit though, this is where things get most subjective. Through my personal trip attempting to analyze this game, I've realized what typically does and doesn't click with me when it comes to storytelling.
Why would I come out of the shadows just to lie to you? Lily is alive, and she's with us. But she's in danger. We need you to help save her.
Save her? What have you done to her? Get your hands off me!
I was hoping you'd come willingly, Sebastian. But we don't have time for this bullshit. We need you. Lily needs you.
The story and presentation in The Evil Within 2 hits a few marks for sure, but overall I found it tame, slightly pompous, and completely uninspired. The fact that this whole STEM research spawned from Ruvik's project makes sense. A more cynical part of me thinks they were literally building a Second Life game that can actually kill you, but hey, with people's obsession over virtual reality and such, I see the value in making this controlled world, big corporation ulterior motives aside. Then there's other aspects of the story I don't really understand. Lily, Sebastian's daughter, being the prime candidate for the core of Union was an alluring mystery for a while, until those involved admit there is no real reason behind it. According to what they're saying, most any kid would work as the core perfectly fine. It just kinda deflates the whole mystery and would have been better left a secret they were keeping from Sebastian, in my opinion. You guys are a big corrupt corporation. Go do something that's equally evil and more sensible, like getting an orphan that doesn't have dedicated parents.
Lily is special. She was found because of her off-the-chart scores on her standardized tests.
I get why Stefano is taking advantage of STEM and Union. Sadistic guy wants to create more art in ways you can't achieve in the real world. It's fine. For a shallow, cartoonish villain, it's fine. It stops being fine when he gets usurped by Father Theodore. That really made no sense to me. So, Ted here was using Stefano as some puppet to get rid of the Mobius soldiers. Why though? So he can take over Union, an idea that even leaves Sebastian dumbfounded.
Why does everyone want to control Union? It's not even real.
Why does he want to take over the virtual reality town of Union? Well, apparently that means he would be able to connect to the implanted chips of all the Mobius employees, so having a hold of that company's employees would in turn lead him to, and I'm not even simplifying things, these are Ted's own words, to take over the world.
Union is Mobius. Their minds are connected to it. To control Union is to control them. To control them is to control the world.
The world, as in planet Earth. Dude, you don't even know if that'll work. The wireless service is still in beta. Are the real-life Mobius employees outside of STEM so incompetent that an exploit this easy actually exists? Some of the stupidest stories from Resident Evil made more sense than this. How did nobody question this stupid shit? I think I know why. Everyone that praises this game's story conveniently leaves out Stefano's hollow character and Ted's lame motivation, because the audience is forcibly focused on Sebastian's family that he can't stop growling and yelling about.
Lily is dead! I read the police report! I was at her funeral!
We can rewrite history if we want to.
His daughter Lily, who basically has no character, which kind of tells me how much thought they gave to her as a motivation, and his wife Myra, whose only purpose in the game is to usurp the usurper in the story too quickly for me to give a crap about the original usurper. The story of Sebastian falling in a pit of drunken sadness from the loss of his family is something they beat you over the head with from beginning to end, and I can't stand it.
3 years. I've been trying to track you down for 3 years.
And you thought you'd find me at the bottom of an empty bottle. Is that it?
Not only because it feels like a complete disconnect from the Sebastian I got to know in the first game, but also...
Are you alright?
I've got a wonderful family. An amazingly smart and beautiful wife. Why wouldn't I be alright?
It's just so fucking corny. Maybe it's just me, but this kind of stuff always felt like a cheap Hollywood ploy that's been prominent for decades. It's such a basic narrative that I've seen so many times already. Only recently did this start really sinking its teeth deep into video game stories. But the father-child dynamic is something I've vibed with before. I like The Last of Us, and I'm a dang Silent Hill fan after all. Harry Mason's missing daughter was a fine motivation. His dedication to find Cheryl made it very believable that he would continue putting himself through the nightmares running amok within the town, much like Sebastian in this game. That contained story didn't really do a whole lot for me. It was the town itself and the cult residing in it that made me so interested, as well as its horror aspects and stupendous atmosphere. To be frank, Cheryl's connection with the cult and antagonist in the original Silent Hill was much smarter and more interesting than Mobius kidnapping Lily, the daughter of 2 seasoned detectives, because reasons. And when it came to The Last of Us, the entire situation was more complicated and the development between the 2 main characters was much more present, seeing as how they were together for nearly the entire game, giving Ellie ample time to develop a character I can actually care about. Another example from a franchise I try to appreciate is Dead Rising 2. To this day, a lot of people claim they enjoyed this game much more than the first. While I know the whole thing is subjective, I raise my eyebrow when they tell me the story was much more engaging and interesting, and the first thing out of their mouths is the Chuck and Katie dynamic. She has practically no character at all, yet people found her so compelling because she was constantly shoved in the player's face and reminded how much Chuck cares for her. And this honestly worked like a charm.
However, I had more motivation this time around to do all that because I wanted to keep my daughter Katie alive instead of just snapping stupid ass pictures with Frank West. And then in giving this game...
Sound familiar? But I digress. While she was a hollow motivation for Chuck, I liked her inclusion a lot because she is a good example of taking advantage of video games as a medium. Through the Katie narrative, they created an interesting mechanic that ramped up the stakes when it came to exploring and helping people, considering you had to find rare medicine to give her every 24 in-game hours, or else you immediately fail in the main story. Oh, and, your character's daughter dies, so, that's also compelling. So I'll definitely take the good with the bad. It's just, I found the majority of Dead Rising 2's writing to be very weak, and was surprised how little that was addressed by players. You see the parallel situation in this, right? I think a problem that many sequels have is they lack the ability to provide deep and profound writing, like with the original game. Not that all of the Evil Within 1 had great writing, but we'll get into that. This is usually due to a change in staff, but not always. Even so, they attempt to compensate in the sequel with heavy characterizations. It's what happened with No More Heroes 2, Dead Rising 2, Hotline Miami 2, and now The Evil Within 2.
That psycho is still on the loose in here.
I turned on the emitter, and that seemed to slow him down. But he got away. And he's got Lily. She must be so scared and alone. I've got to find her before he does something terrible to her. I'm so close. I can feel it.
The writing and presentation of the characters are about as good as the story itself. It's fine to have a couple of quips, but this game goes overboard when it wants to be funny or stylish, and I just find it insufferable. Either commit to being Resident Evil 4 or don't.
I thought I was better than that. Disappointed!
Overall presentation goes on a roller coaster between fine and absolutely terrible. The actual cutscenes are done pretty well, and I like some of the atmosphere showcased throughout, but these dialogue scenes are horrendous, and there's so much of it if you want to try giving a shit about the story.
Can you help me out?
If you're asking me to go out there with you, you can forget about it.
How were people not distracted by the stilted, unnatural, constantly repeated animation? The body language is so shitty. This is about the same quality as Tony Hawk's Underground.
Please, man, we have to get out of town. The Elm Street dealers are after us. We're desperate. Didn't you see us jump the bridge?
Guess I was too busy stopping lying skate rats from sneaking into the station and spray painting "I am the king of no pants" on the phone kiosks.
What's your problem, Bacon Bits? Wake up on the wrong side of your mother this morning?
How does a GameCube game from 2005 have dialogue scenes with very similar direction and look a million times better?
Your biggest scene is over.
I don't ever remember being a part of your crappy script.
I know when it came to The Evil Within 1 that it felt like the plot meanders about just to disappear for another hour or so, and the majority of the characterizations, namely Sebastian, were exclusively in memos. Therefore, it was hard to connect with the characters. It doesn't help that it sounds like the actors are phoning it in, with the exception of Jackie Earle Haley.
There can be no mistake. This one is compatible. I know who you are. Seb. I know what you crave, what you fear. Will you be able to live with yourself knowing what I'm gonna make you do? Poor little Joseph couldn't. Too bad they dragged you into this. But either way, you're mine. To do with as I please.
But now, the sequel has the complete opposite problem. The characterizations are up front and in your face the entire time with constant expository about how they feel.
After Beacon, I tried to make some sense of what happened to me, but everyone said I was delusional, or hiding the truth. I started to believe that maybe they were right, that maybe I was crazy. I felt so frustrated, useless. Drinking was the only thing that killed the pain.
And all the ins and outs of how Union works are allocated to memos and feels even weaker than what the first game provided. The developers also stated multiple times that they intentionally made the Evil Within 2 story much simpler than the first. That would be fine if they gave me characters to care about, but they didn't. Just about all of them are so cliche and uninteresting to me. Stack this with a new cast of voice actors that are trying way too hard.
Where did you get this?
Speaking more on characters, I really don't like Sebastian as a protagonist in this game. I understand he's in a hurry to save his daughter and obviously kind of panicky, but that doesn't really excuse the multiple times he's an insufferable prick.
But if you can't help me with that, then we've got nothing else to discuss. Deadly gas leaks, huh? Thanks for saving the worst for last, O'Neill. What the hell are these things about? Damn it. Lily's inside there.
I wish I could help you.
Me too. Hold on, I haven't agreed to anything yet. What's in it for me? Yeah, well that didn't work. And now I'm back to square one again. Great. So the tests only filtered out the weakest of psychos. Maybe if you hadn't let your last guard take the fall for you. What the fuck did you just send me into? Takes a lot of ammo to get them off my back. Do you have anything stronger in here? I'm getting ready to head into the Marrow, which you neglected to tell me about. Thank God, that mask smelled terrible.
That's not much to go on.
Tell me something I don't know.
We might still be able to help each other out.
This better be good.
There isn't enough for me to even try diving into. It's so lame, and the only living beings to keep Sebastian company in Union feel like injected assets to keep the story going, rather than real people of that world with an actual drive.
Besides, I'm sick of hiding. The only way we're gonna get through this is if we work together. It's the only way to save Lily.
Let's go watch Hoffman die heroically.
Hoffman!
Let's go! Save Lily!
Hoffman, no!
What did I just fucking say?
Although, I'll happily admit that Sykes was the most enjoyable character, and his side story came to a very interesting conclusion, or rather, lack thereof.
I'm a STEM programmer, but I've got other skills too, like hacking information systems. I know all kinds of things that nobody else knows. I need you to restart a server inside the Marrow. It should be easy enough as long as none of those freaks are around. If you get the server on, I may be able to find another way out of Union.
There's really a way to get out of Union?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm sure as hell gonna give it a try. Thanks, man. Wouldn't have been able to do it without you.
Are you sure this is gonna work?
No, but staying in here isn't gonna do me any good. Anything is worth a try at this point. Thanks, man. I left you something in there for helping me. I'm not gonna need it where I'm going. See you on the other side, Sebastian.
He's gone. I wonder if it worked.
Our attempt to use a STEM pod as an emergency exit port has been declared a failure. Despite a 25% success rate, the decision has been made to discontinue research. 1 in 4 test subjects made the trip back successfully. The other 3 simply ceased to be. We believe that the other 75% have been lost in an uncharted sublevel of STEM. A dream within a dream, from which there is no known way to return. Due to the number of unknown factors, the experiment has been abandoned.
25% chance of success. I'm not gonna risk Lily's life like that. Hope Sykes is out in the real world.
Tatiana was particularly annoying as well. Not that she had much going on in the first game. She honestly just feels like someone Sebastian is using so that he wouldn't be talking to himself for the entire game.
He's powerful.
He's also a sick freak.
But he is as driven as you are, and seeking the same thing. You are more alike than you'd care to admit.
I'm not like him. He's a murderer.
And there are no bodies strewn in the path behind you?
Oh my god, shut up! Who wrote this crap? Oh yeah. Speaking of, however, I like the memos regarding Sebastian's therapy sessions that occurred after the original game. It's interesting to think that he actually did develop severe PTSD afterward. After all, who wouldn't? I wish more of this was emphasized outside of these memos and a few side objectives. Almost as if they wanted to distance themselves from the original game in the most meaningful ways. I mean, even the director claims playing the first game isn't necessary to get into the sequel. Perhaps that's why they didn't even go for a really easy connection, like maybe take a few of the old notes about Sebastian's family and turn those into flashbacks. Let the audience see how Sebastian met Myra, or how Lily's death was faked. Seeing his notes from the first game come to life would have been a great way to make the sequel more related to the original title. But no, you'd rather spend flashbacks showing me the guy who clearly loved his family, loves his family. Thanks, that's really useful. Real useful there, thanks. Speaking more on The Evil Within 1, I know there wasn't much to the characters beat for beat throughout most of the cutscenes, the outlier being Ruvik. If we're really to compare the two games, I think having a single main antagonist rather than a bunch of jackoffs worked out a lot better. I think it has to do with his background actually mattering for the entire campaign. Ruvik's story was important from beginning to end. The tragedy behind his character led him to a last-ditch effort plan he came up with shortly before the game began. The loss of his sister, whom he may have been too close with, drove him to this project in the first place. His goal was to live in a world where he can be with his sister Laura again, regardless of the selfish and sadistic means it would take to reach said goal. He was already a messed up kid and even self-aware of his mental state.
Men of science are dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. You can show me your experiments. I can show you things.
You wouldn't like them. You'd think they're gross.
In science, one must do any number of things a layperson may find disgusting. I've done many things others would consider distasteful.
You think I'm some kind of a monster?
You concern yourself so much with your appearance, but that mind of yours, that's all that matters.
So this was just a progression of his psychopathy. All that aside, he lost someone he deeply loved and wanted to be with her again, more than anything else in the world. This is something practically everyone experiences at some point in their life, whether it's losing a relative or significant partner or even pet. It's devastating. It's all you think about for a while. Maybe you were dependent on that companionship, thinking you'll never feel alone as long as you're with them. So when you do lose them, you don't know what to think. Sometimes when you go to sleep, you dream about being with them like nothing changed. And when you wake up, the only thought to welcome you is wishing that you never did. Ruvik was working towards a means to never wake up from that dream. Of course, thanks to the conniving people that took interest in his work, he lost the credit, he lost that goal, and he lost his body. Any essence of his being was rid from the real world. Once push came to shove, he began his plan to escape, coming across a patient that had an equally traumatic experience beforehand. Through someone that was able to relate to Ruvik and his devastating loss, he found a way out. Because he was denied his dream, Ruvik decided that he just wanted to be left alone, and he manages to succeed in that regard. I know the original game didn't exactly make it clear what was going on with characters like Ruvik, but it's all there in plain sight. It's almost euphoric to decipher stories like this on your own instead of having it spoon-fed. I love discovering the ins and outs of Ruvik. I've felt that seemingly endless pain before. The idea of it is certainly controversial if used in real-life practice, but I can't help but think if someone discovered a way to be with their lost loved one again, who the hell wouldn't take that opportunity?
엄마! 엄마 어디 있었어? 엄마 항상 엄마 내 생각했어?
With all that said, it's frustrating to see people make direct comparisons between the two games and barely attempt understanding Ruvik's drive and the evil within one so that they can call it generic and senseless, while in the same sentence admit they stopped paying attention early on. Then praise the sequel story endlessly without even bringing up the most obvious issues in it. Stefano was a shallow serial killer with no depth outside of art. Ted wanted to rule the world, and the Mobius boss guy was barely even there. Hell, Mobius as a company was slathered with incompetence and stupid-ass choices. How can anyone give a shit about these terrible characters? How do people not realize the nothingness they brought into this boring story? I guess people just find the millionth tale about a guy doing anything he can for his family to be compelling enough. I know I sound like an asshole ragging on this kind of thing so much, but it just never impresses me in storytelling. And I am astounded how easily people seem to get caught up in it, regardless of how tired the concept is. I'm sure some of it has to do with more clear motivations, which The Evil Within 2 definitely sported. Although, part of me thinks a lot of people are really just susceptible to Hollywood schlock. It must come down to some kind of psychology, just like other practices.
Here at Hollywood Studios, we've been conscious of what successful films have not only been made, but have stood the test of time. After many decades of research, we've realized that part of the process of making a successful film is having a good story. After many more years of research, we discovered that audiences respond better to action sequences if the characters in peril are ones we care about and want to survive. Each participant in the study was shown a large rock to act as the main character, and by the end of the test, we took a large sledgehammer and smashed the rock into many pieces in front of them. What we found is that people are more responsive to the loss of the rocks if we had given them stories, backgrounds, personality traits, you know, anything we could attach onto them to make them seem more human and less like a rock. Now, unfortunately, we ran into a bit of a problem. See, the time it took to develop and explain these traits to the test subjects proved to be tiresome for both the creators of these traits and the participants involved. Some even started asking questions about the rock, but we didn't want that. Fast forward 2 years later, and here at Hollywood Studios, we came up with the perfect solution. We found that we were able to get near identical results with our participants after presenting the rock under special conditions. Turns out, all we had to do was place a dainty, slimmer rock next to it with 1 or 2 pebbles by its side. The result was outstanding. And let me tell you, I sat in for one of these sessions and they brought the sledgehammer out after about like 30 seconds and they went hysterical. This one woman just started crying, "Oh, please don't kill him, he's got a family!" And then we smashed it. It was fantastic.
Shoving character motivation in your face in the form of a small child from beginning to end, these goofy-ass smash cut transitions that I haven't seen used so inappropriately since Saw 4, and the cherry on top that maybe should have been the first red flag, the initial trailer using a dark, gritty cover of a pop song for its background music. The schlock of the schlock, another chapter in the step-by-step instructions of how to make blockbuster film trailers.
So happy together. I wish we could just
But don't worry about it.
Black hole sun, won't you come?
A lot of this feels like a game project trying to ape the style of film rather than forming its own path or methods inspired by it. Expanding on the incessant comparisons between this game and Silent Hill, people are still trying to prop this as a new generation Silent Hill 2, and to that I say no, no, absolutamente no! When it comes to the first two Silent Hill games, their emphasis on exploration was a means to turn the town itself into a character, so to speak. It isn't just an abandoned town, it told you its story on its own, sometimes with many words, sometimes with none. As you explore, you learn about the town, bit by bit, as well as how it works. Many of its messages conjured up by the town itself. This corrupt place actually communicated with you. Silent Hill 1 sets up the town for you to romp in with the corrupted spiritual power running amok. Crazy shit like rusty-ass windmills and grated floors as you run away from apes and dogs and what have yous. Meanwhile, Silent Hill 2 uses that same town in what feels like an aftermath to the events of 1, thus why it has a much more mellowed out vibe. How Silent Hill 2 presented the town added more to its importance, post-mortem. Granted, they were different districts, I'm speaking more on what these streets felt like. They also sprinkled other bits of atmosphere that quietly told you more about the parties involved, lured into this town for their mental and physical punishment. The town of Union in Evil Within 2 doesn't really feel like that, as much as it wants to try. It even copied the same premise Silent Hill had for its first game, and even some of the second. A quiet, serene town advertised as a relaxation destination for vacations, but powers unbeknownst to the civilians residing within become corrupt and tore it apart, transforming it into this nightmare world. Even the memos describing that the nightmares are personalized between each folk, but they never actually show that?
Guy who said he was my husband started acting all weird, kept looking over his shoulder at something I couldn't see. Then all of a sudden, he's screaming and starts to change.
Everything in the town feels sterile from beginning to end, with very little personality, and as I've expressed before, all those radio transmissions got old real fast. They don't help with world building at all. Anything that feels like it has a message to convey is very plain and obvious. There's a giant eyeball in the sky because Stefano is watching you. Great. Obscura is composed of women's body parts because Stefano liked murdering women. Good. Everything is on fire because Ted took over and he's burned. I don't know. I think another reason people felt the need to compare this to Silent Hill 2 is that these two games share some story beats at first. A lonely, downtrodden man unable to deal with the loss of his loved ones comes across the opportunity that might mean the prosperity of being with them again. He learns quickly that he must traverse through a town full of danger and peril in order to see this through to the end. Of course, the games couldn't be any more different beyond that. When it came to James's story in Silent Hill 2, it's much more about facing what he's repressed and coping with what he committed. Hence the heavy symbolism throughout in the form of messages the town provides and the creatures lurking about. It's full of despair and manipulation, the latter namely in the form of Maria, who was manifested in order to force James to see the truth. You probably can't guess exactly how James's adventure will turn out, but I think for anyone paying attention, they get that feeling early on that this story isn't going to end well for him. The Evil Within 2 never gave me that vibe. In fact, I would argue the conclusion was very obvious and predictable. I couldn't expect this amount of schlock in a story to take the route of a downer ending, and any form of manipulation towards Sebastian losing his family feels less like a corrupted power of the town forcing him to see some unknown truth, and more like the big bad guy just messing with him because he's the big bad guy. It's just so hackneyed. I feel like the creators of Silent Hill 2 also respected the audience a lot more when it came to connecting with their main character. We didn't need corny flashbacks or drunken outbursts to understand James's desperation. Sometimes all you needed was a single line.
It's just... I guess I really don't care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going to town either way.
Cut. Print. That's it. That's all we need. That's all we need to get going. It's perfect. Also, please don't misunderstand all this. I'm not trying to prop myself as some intellectual who's too smart for this story. That isn't what I'm saying. I'm an idiot who liked memorizing never-changing patterns in 20-minute shooters for about half of my life. When I first finished this game, I really was just confused why most of the reception towards the story was so positive. Maybe I just connect better with dismal settings that lead to dismal results, and obviously not everyone is like that. Even the first game didn't feel the need to end things on a positive note. Hey, he's alive! That's all you're gonna get from us. The Evil Within 2, on the other hand, literally ends with smiles all around and our hero driving off into the sunset. Oh my god, they couldn't have picked a lamer ending if they tried. I'm not blind to why people get caught up with the game's characterizations and its attempt to tug at heartstrings. I mean, it didn't work for me, but I understand seeing value in that. And I can see someone who didn't engage with the first game's story to find more to appreciate in the second when they don't really attempt to take in the former beyond a single playthrough. However, at the risk of sounding pompous and overly defensive, to compare it to the original Silent Hill games, it almost devalues those experiences. While Silent Hill isn't a wholly original series, taken in many Western culture and horror pieces for inspiration, the first 4 games are considerably unique as horror experiences with deep, profound narratives. I don't think Silent Hill fanboyism is the reason behind their lasting appeal, all of them nearly 20 years old but still universally cherished in gaming communities to this day. And you still have so many companies trying to bite their style. 3 of these games didn't even need a dad and child dynamic for you to latch onto in order to be memorable. Think about that one. And to further hammer their intent to try being like Silent Hill, something that left me really confused was reading something by Trent Haga, the head writer of Evil Within 2, when describing its story. When someone asked him about unwelcome truths when you're playing the Evil Within 2, he says that perhaps as a result of the things that you've done in the past resulted in the situation that you're at now, and coming to terms with that, acknowledging it, and being able to get over it, as a hero does, in this transformative journey to come out successful at the other end. Is it just me? That sounds like he's describing a James more than a Sebastian. He didn't do anything that prompted the loss of his family. I thought maybe he was talking about Kidman, but the latter half of that statement doesn't fit her story. I can't help but postulate that this is an accidental admittance that they're trying too hard to be like, that game I won't shut up about. I also can't help but notice the plethora of writing credits he has outside of video games, which might explain a lot of how the story was presented and why I can't stomach it. Also, if anyone is wondering, the reason I never bring up any quotes by John Johannes is because the only things he ever talks about are how much bigger and better and different this new game is. None of it is that interesting, and I'm pretty sick of hearing him describe the original game as little more than a mistake. Is it starting to make sense why I don't dig The Evil Within 2? I'm happy to say it isn't quite on the same level as games I legitimately despise. I don't consider it to be some sort of unplayable trash as much as I think portions are half-assed. It isn't Dead Rising 4, it isn't Hardcore Uprising, no, it isn't even close to those on that chart. What chart? I don't know, this one. Overall, it's okay, I guess. Stamp that on there. It's okay, I guess. Like I've said before, I wanted to love this game. It has mechanics that could work swimmingly. I also think some of the atmosphere and presentation is really good. For me, it comes down to not liking the core design at all, or its general disregard towards the first game in nearly all of its aspects. Controlling Sebastian doesn't feel good, nor does the gunplay, and the stealth mechanics aren't fun to use, mostly because the AI are as dumb as rocks. The atmosphere is boring and doesn't really breathe any creative air to me, the monster designs are absolutely terrible, and most of all, I can't stand the story nor the characterizations. I wouldn't call all of this generic though. Sure, it sports some derivative beats here and there, but so did the first title. I guess in a lot of ways, I can still see their attempts to make a unique and enjoyable horror game. I just find it really irresponsible to disparage a game that goes for a cinematic feel in a very gamey sense, and then praise a sequel that does nothing but take Hollywood notes in a way that feel a lot less genuine, a lot less sincere. It might not be as heavy of a line blur as in Uncharted, but it's still something I don't think should be encouraged if people want games as a medium to evolve and be more respected. Not that it matters anymore, a lot of things are changing for Bethesda, and in turn, Tango Gameworks. I don't think a new installment for this franchise is something in the cards for them anytime soon, if ever. I was initially excited for this series continuing, but now in retrospect, I think I'm fine with acknowledging and adoring a single horror game that might be Mikami's last effort as a director. Of course, Tango is now working on a brand new game known as Ghostwire Tokyo. From everything we've seen so far, it looks visually stupendous, and as someone who spent a decent chunk of his teens reading through Japanese urban myth stories, I'm really interested to see how they'll go about this game. While Ikumi Nakamura was originally spearheading this project as director, she left the company entirely to have a baby, I guess. Aww, good for her. Kenji Kimura stepped in as director, and he's been working on games for decades, but never as a main director before this. Is it bad for me to say I'm glad it isn't John Johannes? Sorry, bud. You had your chance to impress me. Plus, Ghostwire looks like something that'll be hard-wired into the roots of Japanese culture.
I think all Japanese games are somewhat influenced by manga and anime. Even if they are trying to make a realistic game, some of the game is influenced by manga and anime culture, and that little difference is probably harmful to Western audiences. That's what I feel.
Anyway, Ghostwire Tokyo looks pretty sick so far, and I'm looking forward to punching some ghosts in their stupid fucking faces. But back to The Evil Within. It was a nice return to form in some ways. Most of the mainline Resident Evil stories have individual aspects that shine, but appear weaker when you sum them all up. It's funny thinking how this game was able to keep that tradition at least. It's also a game that wasn't afraid of getting its hands dirty in visceral action. The entire thing felt much more genuine and sincere as a new entry by an old hand heavily seasoned in the video game industry. Maybe I changed a few people's minds that initially despised the original game, maybe not. Probably not. But these are the truest feelings I know in regards to these games, and I just really wanted to let this all out. I believe there's still a market for survival horror-ish action games. The Resident Evil remake port and the remake of Resident Evil 2 sold tremendously, and my reservations aside, it's cool that the latter still had a heavy emphasis on search action like the original games. Still, perhaps this experience made Mikami reconsider his position and decided he should only use his ability to help lesser-known game developers get their names out there. That's something I can greatly respect for him to do with his company and position in the industry. In the end, I can definitely take comfort knowing he never let me down with any game he directed. Except this one. And how this possibly final directing project was a great throwback to the horror that made him the man he is today. Thanks for watching. Ooh, Merry Christmas! Yeah, I didn't expect this video to take this long, but I appreciate everybody for being patient with me. I would like to take this moment and give a big thanks to Koopy for being a huge help in fleshing out this entire video. I couldn't be more grateful for him taking the time to look over all of this with me as a fellow fan of The Evil Within. And once again, big thanks to Ghost in a Jar for providing his voice in the video. And of course, big thanks to my patrons for continuing to support me. Stay safe and don't eat too much candy, or do. I'm not the boss of you.